Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I am Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. We got another special guest. Falls from the elite national tree. For those of you who've listened, Jonathan Grasset is a close friend of this man. We got the director of recruiting for elite national, Geoff Kimmel, on the line today. So how we doing, Geoff?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on. Blessed to be here and, excited to talk a little college baseball and recruiting.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, before we kick it off, you got a pretty unique background. You've done a lot of coaching. You've been at several different spots, a variety of different schools. Walk us through kind of how you got into this and then what your path is to get to where you are today.
Okay. I did 11 years as a college coach. After I finished up my college career, played at Wesley College, Division III school in Dover, Delaware. That's now part of Delaware State University's school system. So, played there. Then I had an opportunity to stay on as a graduate assistant. Did 2 years there. Was a recruiting coordinator under Brett Underwood. He was a great head coach. Left there, had an opportunity to go to Coppin State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and coach under Sherman Reed, who's done a tremendous job there. And he's helped build that program into, they went to a regional a few years back and gave Coastal Carolina all they could handle. So did 2 years there, ended up at Furman University down in Greenville, South Carolina. Coach for Brett Harker there, who's another great one. Left there. Came back up to Delaware, was at Delaware State University as a recruiting coordinator, spent 3 years there. Then I left Delaware State and went back to South Carolina to coach at Limestone University in Gaffney, South Carolina with Brett Harker again. So I've been a Division I, Division II, and Division III recruiting coordinator. I've seen different levels of this thing. And it's been a fun journey. Ended up on this side, just, life kind of took me in this direction, and I love being a college baseball coach, and that was an awesome ride. I'm excited to be on the other side now, trying to help players get to the next level, right, and trying to educate families, and trying to get them good information so that they're well equipped to navigate this process. That's kind of along the same lines what you guys do, and you do an excellent job of it. So. How I ended up, with Elite National. I've been a college coach for a while, and I've known Jonathan Grasset and Matt Wertz, the owner of Elite, for a long time. Recruited a ton of players over the years from there. A couple guys that have done really well. One in particular that's been, gone on to get drafted and play professional baseball. So they're a great program. I've known they're a great program. They're good guys. They're about the right things. And, I've always been kind of worried about the travel baseball and showcase baseball and recruiting service stuff. I know there's a lot of bad actors out there. There's a lot of money pits. There's a lot of misinformation or just, bad information, honestly, that's out there. And I didn't know if I wanted to work in that space, but these guys approached me with a couple opportunities, and we worked something out to where I was comfortable moving over to this side. And I've enjoyed it so far working in this space, because I think that there are some good actors on this side of things, and I think that we as a group are one of them. We've got the opportunity to educate people, guide people, help these players achieve their goals. And at the end of the day, we come out here, we try not to overpromise and underdeliver. We try and just do what we say we're going to do, and help these guys, continue on in their journey. So it's been a great ride so far. I'm excited to keep it rolling, but fired up to talk a little bit about college baseball and my knowledge of it and what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're tight with Jonathan, and I think mine and yours first contact came via one of my favorite guys that we've ever worked with, Mr. CC, Christian Sherlambus.
Yeah, he's a dude.
He's awesome. He's awesome. He's off to
Yeah,
a really nice start down at Presbyterian, had a good freshman
that's
year.
great.
And I actually talked to his mom the other day, and
Yeah,
he really settled in and is doing well. So,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, we bring guys like you on and Jonathan on because good people, you got a ton of experience in this. And I mean, we serve a very similar mission, which is to try to help people figure this out. And it's
yeah.
complex, and we're going to get into some of that complexity here tonight, which obviously the big hot topic is the roster crunch that's coming in 40 to 34. So let's
Mhm.
start there. And, if you want to give us kind of your thoughts, we've touched on it a little bit. We've had some dedicated podcasts kind of breaking down the new rule change, but it's always good to hear from somebody else who's doing this as well. And, maybe you're hearing some different stuff. So, what are you hearing out there? What are your thoughts on this? And kind of what are you thinking the long-term impact this is going to have?
Well, I think college baseball is going to be significantly more talented, top to bottom, as a result of what's going on with this roster crunch. I think right now it's tougher to get recruited than it's ever been. And I know, hey, look, you go back to COVID and all that, but this is now just a culmination of the landscape changing over the last several years now, to where it's just, man, it is really difficult to get recruited. And that's at any level. I heard, just from some coaches, a story of one kid got cut loose by a Power Five program, ended up with a Division II program that's in a good league, but at the bottom of that league. And you just, that's something that you hadn't seen before. You don't see guys go from the very top as far as, level wise, and then not have that opportunity, and then go down to, a mid-tier Division II program. But there's just not a lot available at the next level. So it's a tough time. It's tough to navigate it, but there's definitely a lot that parents and players can do to make sure that they're well positioned and try and keep leverage on their side. I think it'll sort itself out in time as people on both sides start to understand really the implications of the change in the roster size, and people adjust their sight lines. It always corrects itself. When you look at college baseball and the way it's changed, or just the game of baseball in general, it's kind of cyclical. Every 5 years, there's a big change, and it moves back in this direction, then it swings back in this direction down the road. So um, it's more of just kind of, hey, how do we navigate what's in front of us right now?
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. I think it's going to raise the floor significantly.
Yeah,
That's something me and
absolutely.
Keith have talked about is, there's roughly 1,800 Division I spots that aren't going to be available anymore. Well, all of those guys are going to have homes, all those
Mhm.
1,800 kids, and those Division III schools, I think, are going to really benefit. And the level of play at the Division III level is really good. Period.
Yeah,
No asterisks, no buts. Um, the days of the kid who's 76 to 78 going and playing Division III baseball, like
right.
they're long gone. But I think that's one of the big impacts. And for my money, I think it always starts with an honest evaluation and an understanding of the landscape, because I think that's where people they get mixed up a little bit, is that there's not going to be as many opportunities, and you have to be open to other possibilities that fit what you're looking for. And only 2.2% of kids get to play Division I baseball, and that's going to go down, especially when you
Yeah.
factor from a high school level, especially when you factor in the transfer portal, which we all know has been really impactful. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. But
Hmm.
the other thing to note about the roster change is it wasn't long ago that the limit was 35. So this seems like a big shift, but really COVID's what brought on the roster expansion. And now you're kind of resetting back to where it was pre-COVID, where we had rosters of 35. So the coaches who've been in it, this isn't a big change for them, but it is like an immediate course correction that's happening. You're seeing 2025s get decommitted. it seems to me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, it seems to me like the 26 class is moving a lot slower than it would have in the past.
Yes.
I
Yes,
think
absolutely.
some of that might be because of the new contact rule, but I think a lot of it is that guys want to be sure on players. They're not going to take as many chances. They can always go into the portal, specifically at the higher levels. Like you can just be really, really selective. So I think there's a lot of guys that 3 or 4 years ago likely would have been committed already in that 26 class that are going to need to go through an off season, that are going to need to put together a good spring, that are going to need to have a good start to the summer before they become that Division I type of guy. And I think a lot of that has to do with the roster crunches forced coaches to be more pinpoint with the players that they're bringing in, because you can't just take a guy that you think has upside anymore, because the value of those roster spots has gone up significantly. Like number 34 can't really be a project guy anymore because that dude might have to contribute because you just have a shorter bench. You're going to have less arms on your staff, and I think they need to be more targeted. So that's my personal thought on it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on kind of the timing of it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. When you look at, we'll talk a little bit with recruiting timelines, of course, but, at different levels. But these guys, they can't miss. They don't have as much room for error on missing on really any of these roster spots like they did with a 40-man roster. And, there's some implications, talk about how to set up the rules for, the 34-man roster that might combat over recruiting, right? And people are trying to get away from over recruiting, kind of the way that they were able to get away with it in years prior. So they're a lot more pinpointed on who they're taking. And then with that, one, because of that, there's less guys committed. There's more players that are good players available. I also think that players are training better and earlier. So there's just a more physical recruiting pool to choose from. And between those two and the transfer portal, you throw all that together, there's a ton of really talented players available late. And with that being the case, coaches just aren't going to feel pressured to take a guy early and be worried about missing out on it, because there's probably someone that's a comparable player available for less 6, 7 months down the road. There's guys running around right now that are uncommitted in the 25 class that 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they're surefire, no doubt, mid-major Division I players. On both sides of the ball, you're talking about position players, talking about arms. And I think it'll be good for the sport long term, because coaches are taking more time to get to know the player before they get them on campus, before they, really make a commitment to them. And they're going to take more time to let players develop before making a call on whether or not they're going to add them. So when more coaches are getting it right on who they're bringing in, usually you're going to see better retention in the way of who they want to keep around, right? The fit tends to work out a little bit better with that. So it could be a good thing, but in the short term, of course, timeline wise, it's working against, players that are looking to get picked up.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I hope it leads to less over recruiting, and there's still some question marks about what that's going to look like in
Right.
terms of when they have to set the 34 and all that. But
Right.
I mean, it's common knowledge amongst people who've been in the game. Um, I think it's becoming more common knowledge because people are talking about it, but it's pretty common in years prior to have 55, 60 guys on campus at some of these big programs. And um, hopefully that's going to curtail some of this. And maybe you do see a few less guys in the transfer portal every year, because it is going to be a better fit, because guys are making more educated decisions. They're not going to miss on guys. They're not going to have guys show up on campus, and in the first inter squad, you go, shoot, that kid just can't do it here. So, I mean, and to your point, I think that'll be good long term for everybody, because you're not going to have these walk on spots getting thrown out to kids, and they're taking these spots thinking that they legitimately have a chance to make a team. but in reality, they're the 10th outfielder and they're showing up on campus and it's almost inevitable they're going to end up getting cut. Those kids, if they go about this correctly, should be able to find a place where they can go and find a home and be there for 4 years and enjoy the experience of being a college baseball player. So I I think it'll be good. It's a scramble right now, and I think, and Keith, you've mentioned this a couple times. I don't think we'll know the full ramifications of all of this and how it's all going to work until we see the 26 class go through its full cycle.
Yeah, it's we're in a weird spot, right? Because you had the rule change that came in with not being able to talk to anybody until August 1st going into your junior year, which obviously slowed everything on that class. And then right on the heels of that, we go to a 34-man roster, and what that looks like. So I don't know, I think we had a fairly decent idea of what it was going to look like if we didn't have this impending roster crunch coming, because we saw kind of what happened last year with how the 25 class was handled. But with the 26 class, I think it's going to be even slower. I do think the trend of the Power Fives and such getting into the transfer portal is going to continue. For a couple different reasons. One, they're getting older, more polished players. Two, they have a lot more access to data and video on those players against other college competition. Like, they all have TrackMan and True Media and Synergy, so they can go in and see literally everything it is that they want to see, where they don't have that for high school juniors and seniors. And, unless you're going to be a surefire dude. And look, like, if you're going to play in the Power Five, or I don't even, whatever the Power Fours, like whatever that conference, whatever we're calling them now, but even then, like, even within those conferences, there's going to be teams that are probably going to be a little bit slower than some of the top dogs, like, the LSUs, the Arkansas, the UNCs of the world, where, they can probably go in and get some guys a little bit earlier than some of the other teams. But there's still going to be high school kids that are recruited. It's just going to be a little bit slower. And to Jeff's point earlier, that the maturation and the development that kids can show during that time frame where, 10 years ago, it was just an arms race. Like, let's just commit as many guys as we possibly can and let the chips fall where they may later. Like, can't necessarily do that now. Like, you're going to have to do a little bit more due diligence on the high school side of things, because you want to make sure that you want to mitigate that risk of missing on that kid as much as you possibly can, because that margin for error at 34 it doesn't sound like much when we're talking 34 to 40, but 6 guys is a lot. And, the other side of that was, we all know that a lot of these programs are bringing in more than 40 in the fall, and then seeing how it all played out there, where, there was an excess of guys playing in the fall, and then they cut down to 40 or get close to that number and then keep it and then get to that number for game one. So kind of those days are gone. And I think that's important to mention here when we talk about the impending roster crunch and not being able to miss and those things. Like, they're not going to be able to bring in 50 guys or 45 guys or however it might be for the fall. Like, there's going to be a hard cap on numbers that you can bring in for the fall, because it's going to be scholarship money and all that stuff tied into it. So there's going to be a hard number on that. So that means that, some of those programs that were rolling in 50 dudes in the fall, like, they're not going to do that anymore, because so those guys are now going, that trickle down effect happens, and they're going to other programs that are mid-major guys. Those mid-major guys that were filling out rosters are now going down to lower end Division I, Division II. Those Division II guys where there's no roster limits are flipping down to Division III, things like that. So, when we talk about it lifting the floor of college baseball, that's really what it is. It's not just this pie in the sky idea that we have as to why it's going to make it better. Like, that's why, because there's less spots available at the Division I level, and they can't go over that number in excess. Like, maybe they can bring in 40, and that's what it is. But even then, like, that's 10 guys in some programs that aren't going to that place in the fall. So they're going to find other places to play. So it's not this pie in the sky idea that we have. Like, that's why you're going to see the trickle down effect and why college baseball's floor is going to be raised there. But back to the original point, yeah, we're not going to really have a really good grasp on what's going to transpire until we kind of get into, August, September, October of next year and kind of see how it all plays out, because you're still not going to be able to talk to anybody. So it's going to be, and realistically, when I think the decision's coming out early April on roster limits and scholarships and stuff. So this is all conjecture right now. This is what we think is going to happen. So we'll have a better idea then, and then we'll let it play out and kind of see how it goes there. But this is talking to the people we know and everyone and what we lived through. This is what we think is going to happen.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Obviously, you're seeing a lot of schools prepping for this, cutting guys from the high school class. I mean, I think one of the other impacts that this roster crunch is going to have, and obviously we're more focused on the high school side of it, but there's a lot of guys who are on campus right now, which is, I think this is one of the big question marks going into this offseason, and why I think some of the classes are going a little bit slow is there's going to be a huge influx of portal guys organically. There's going to be guys going into the portal that didn't want to go into the portal, because these coaches are going to have to make some decisions on what they're going to do. If they think they can get a better player in the portal, they might try to get down to 29 before the portal opens up and go get 5 portal guys. So there's guys on college campuses right now that they better have it buttoned up, and they better get after it, and they better be good teammates, and they better do the right kind of stuff, because coaches are making some preemptive decisions on their 25 class to try to get the math right. But at the end of the day, they're going to make some decisions on their current roster in order to continue to build a better team. And I just think that the portal could be, I don't think the portal's going away until they put the kibosh on it, but it could be another wild portal year, because there's going to be a lot of good players, specifically from the highest levels of college baseball, that are going to be in there, and they may not have wanted to go into the portal, which is going to be a really interesting thing to see, and interesting to see how the coaches are going to handle it in terms of the decisions they make at the end of the year with their current roster.
That's an interesting take. I think that's something you're going to see a lot of. That's something that, if I was the guy who's on campus for the first time, I'd make sure I'm doing everything I can do to be a productive part of the program and prove my worth before the end of the semester. So if you are a college guy, make sure you're going to class and show up to workouts on time. All right.
Yeah, don't give those coaches the easy way out. If they're going to cut you, make it be a baseball thing where they just don't think you're good enough. Don't give them a reason to cut you because you're a bad teammate. You don't go to class. You're getting in trouble off the field. I mean, it should all go without saying, but I mean, we know 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, we all made dumb decisions. But if you're trying to hold on, if you're trying to be a part of something, don't give them off the field stuff. And on the field, you just need to prove that you can do something to help the team. You don't need to be the Friday guy for job security, but you need to prove that you belong. Maybe you carve out a little bit of a role as a freshman, but you got to do something that gives those coaches a reason to keep you on campus. And yeah, that's a big question mark of how that's going to look, because nobody knows what these coaches are all doing behind the scenes. Some of them may have already accounted for that with their high school class and have already made the decision hey, we're going to bring back all our returners because we know we're down at this particular number because of the incoming. But I'm sure there's some coaches that said, hey, we really like these high school guys. They're going to be here. We still got to make decisions on at least 3 or 4 more guys. Maybe they lose a couple guys organically because they decide they want to leave the program. But there's some tough decisions that are going to get made by these coaches, and decisions they don't want to make. And that's the other thing that I think doesn't get said enough, is that the coaches who have to make these phone calls, who have to tell a 2025 that they are no longer going to have a spot, or they're going to have to cut kids at the end of the year, they don't want to do this. This is a situation that the NCAA put them in. And these guys aren't bad guys if they, cut your son or decommit a player. Like they have to make decisions because they were forced into a situation where they had to make those decisions. I just hate when I hear people just blindly say, well, that guy's, this guy decommitted a kid and that guy's a jerk because he doesn't care about the players. Like it's not that type of a situation. Like none of these coaches are making those decisions lightly. They all understand the ramifications of that phone call, and none of them want to make that call.
Sure. And the other thing you got to keep in mind with that is, they're put in a tough situation, but they're charged with making the best decision for the betterment of the program. And if they feel that the roster needs to be constructed in a certain way that leaves a player off, they're paid to not put personal feelings in front of making that decision. So it's all circumstantial, but everybody's got opinions about it, right? So, but just a tough year for everybody on both sides. That's for sure.
How do you think the truth? I mean, I don't want to say there's obvious answers to this, but obviously the transfer portal's has had a big impact on college baseball. Um, we talk to families all the time that ask about it. And I think it's an important topic to talk about with recruiting because it definitely has an impact on high school guys. Um, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on why coaches are willing to go into the portal and why it will continue to be an important source of talent for college coaches in coming years.
The portal's interesting. It's I spent time in Division I with the transfer portal and Division II with the transfer portal as a recruiting coordinator, and each year it's kind of the whole conversation around the portal has kind of evolved, and I think that programs have put different value, right or wrong, on transfers. Early on, it was like, hey, you have to recruit transfers. The transfer portal is flooded with talent. You got to go get these guys. And, a few years down the road now, I've talked to a lot of coaches that are trying to get away from the transfer portal at times. There's a lot of talent in the transfer portal, but when you're going and getting a guy, you're going to get in the transfer, it's because you want to win that. If you're going to go and get a guy out of the transfer portal, the dollar value, the dollar figure you need to pay a guy in the transfer portal is probably a little bit higher than what he's worth on paper if you were to get him out of high school. So, you usually get a bad deal financially with, you talk about your roster construction, how you break up your scholarship money and stuff like that. So, you're bringing a guy, a lot of times if they're transferring, they don't have a ton of experience on the field. Now you'll get the case where there's the player that's transferring up because, hey, they had a ton of success, they put up big numbers, they want to go and try and move up the ladder. But the majority of programs are not getting that guy. When I say majority of programs, you're looking at mid-major Division I's, lower tier Division I's, and most of Division II is not getting the guy that's proven with numbers at a level that's known to be really competitive in college baseball. So a lot of the guys that do end up shuffling are guys that haven't really been on the field a ton. And when coaches are going to go spend big money in the transfer portal, it's to try and win now, win immediately, go get a guy that's going to be a program changer, a difference maker. And, when you look at that and you look at the recruiting model for the majority of Division II, when you look at the recruiting model for I'd say like the smaller mid majors, I don't want to say the lower tier, but traditionally the lower third of Division I, where these programs don't always have the most resources, you get bad value out of the transfer portal a lot of times. And coaches have identified that and realized, wait, if I go and get really good high schoolers that go fly under the radar and develop them in-house, if I can keep them, I got a better chance of winning. And then on the other side of that, the junior college player is starting to have a lot more value for the masses. If you're a Power 4 program or you're a high mid major, a team that's really competitive year in, year out, you're well funded, you're going to try and get the guy that was a Division II All-American. You're going to try and get, depending, maybe a Division III All-American, but you're going to get the really good player that's got numbers to back it up. And those guys are going to transfer up. And then the guys that couldn't play for you or didn't play consistently transfer down, end up being overvalued. So what I'm getting at here is there's been a little bit of a correction in the recruiting model, especially with value-based recruiting in a lot of these programs. So that's good news for the high school player, and that's good news for the junior college player. All right, that's tough news for 80% of the transfers. Their value is almost diminished now, a few years into this transfer portal thing. So it's interesting. Again, it's the way baseball always kind of works. In college baseball, it'll swing really hard in one direction and then swing back in the other direction. And early on out of the chute, a few years ago, the transfer portal was like everybody needed to get transfers. Now it's kind of coming back the other way with certain programs. But you're seeing more and more programs start singing that tune.
Yeah, seems like the bigger schools have become a lot more selective, where they're trying to plug holes. They're trying to bring in the guy who can come and play right away. I got a hole at third base. We just had a guy get drafted. The kid we brought in as a freshman last year doesn't seem like he's really going to be there. Worst case scenario, we need to bring in some competition. Let's go get a guy who's done it really well at that mid-major level. Let's take the guy who's a first-team All A10 player as a sophomore. Let's go get him for his draft year and bring him into the ACC or the SEC. I think that is seems to be more of the approach that some of the bigger schools are starting to take. But you hit on the junior college thing, and I've been on the JUCO train, and I know Keith has been on the JUCO train for a variety of different reasons. But I think that's kind of the unspoken spot for a lot of talent these days, is that junior college baseball is really good. If you're a 2-year junior college guy and you're a position player and you start every day, I mean, you might have 400, 500 at bats under your belt. That, to me, is a more valuable kid than the freshman who transferred, and to your point, maybe got 30 at bats, didn't like where he was at. And I think that junior college baseball is going to grow in popularity when you're talking about building rosters. They're cheaper. They're only on your books for 2 years, which is huge for a lot of programs to be able to get guys off the books quickly. They're more mature. They've got all those at bats. They've been in a college setting for 2 years. A lot of those guys, if they're good, have played summer ball. I think that's one of the more unspoken obstacles that gets presented to high school kids, is that I think people forget that pool of players is out there. And I think it's going to become increasingly more popular to get into the junior college ranks. And if you look at a lot of these really good teams at the higher levels of Division I, it's not an accident that there's a good amount of junior college guys. I mean, it wasn't long ago. I think it was the year Ole Miss won the national championship. But it was like 35% of the 2 teams in the title, 35% of their roster was junior college guys. And I think it goes to the physicality.
Wow.
I think it goes to the experience. There's something to be said about junior college. You usually don't have all the bells and whistles. Those are probably some tougher kids. They're probably there for almost strictly baseball reasons. So they're probably kind of that gym rat type of guy. And I think that's appealing to a lot of schools. I think it's appealing to a lot of coaches.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think, in all the changes and what's going on in college baseball and recruiting over the last few years, I think the junior college program and the junior college player are going to end up being the big winner on the back end of this thing, because their value is definitely increasing. And you see it, every year with roster construction of teams that are winning and winning big, right? So, and I think that's really important. If you're a high school player or a parent of a high school player listening, junior college is an excellent option, and it really doesn't, unless you're talking about being a really high academic, you're chasing down a really high academic institution. The classes you take your first 2 years on campus are mostly gen ed courses. You take them to JUCO. Make sure you take real classes, not like you can't have baseball be 6 of the credits you're transferring in, and you see that a lot. But take real classes, take your 30 credits, and you're going to transfer into most schools and be right where you need to be without missing a beat educationally. But you're going to have a chance to hopefully be on the field for 2 years. To your point, get hundreds of at bats. You play more in the fall. You get more outside competition in the fall. You get a ton of practice. The rules on player development are a lot more lax there, right? As much time you can spend with the coaches. So it's a great incubator for baseball talent, and it's a great incubator for guys to just kind of learn how to win and compete. There's some grit to those guys too. So again, I think that you're going to see as we continue on, you're going to see more value put on that guy when you look at mid-major Division I on down to Division II and even to Division III. So.
No, you hit the nail on the head with the development piece, because there is no practice schedule for the fall like there is in Division I, II, and III. Like, you can practice when you set foot on campus in August all the way until Christmas break, and then you can start again. The second classes start in the spring. And even, you might end up finding yourself in a JUCO program that has a ton of guys, and maybe you don't get a lot of burn your freshman year, but I can promise you the entire year of just straight practice and inter squads and those things are just as valuable, because if you're a freshman at a 4-year school, you're not getting that much development time at whatever school it is. Like, you legitimately have every day of the week for September, October, November, like almost 4 months, and then the entire spring. Like, you're right, you get 14 games in the fall. Like, they're not running out everyone. Like, you are going to play some games in the fall and get at bats, and you're going to inter squad, because if there is a big roster, like, they can't throw everyone, so I think that, like, JUCO baseball, people look down their noses at it, and it's always boggled my mind, because you can look across college rosters, and especially at the higher levels, there's a lot of JUCO guys littered throughout all of those rosters. It's not by accident. It's because they have an opportunity for 1 or 2 years to go and develop and do it in a way in which you wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity at a 4-year school. And to see you get in the weight room and you're practicing and you're playing at a high level, like, there's a lot to be said about it. And I think that sometimes people don't just foo-foo the JUCO route. And I think that it can be a mistake for some people, because you might need a year of development to be able to go do it. And then all of a sudden you have 150 at-bats and a ton of time played in the field, and you can go transfer into a 4-year program and you'd be for light years ahead of other sophomores in your class, or even juniors and seniors who haven't played for 2 or 3 years. And you're right. Like, you need to take legit classes. You can't just take, underwater basket weaving and think it's going to transfer everywhere. But it's your 4-year degree still says whatever school it is. There's not an asterisk for, because you went to a junior college. It still says Marist College. You graduated from that school. And when I was at West Alabama, we were JUCO heavy. There were a lot of guys that we got from junior colleges, Itawamba and LSU Eunice, and a lot of schools down there. Like, it is big boy baseball. Like, you go watch some of those JUCOs play down south. It is no joke. Like, they are JUCO bandits, and they roll into 4-year programs, and they kind of stake their claim when they get on campus, because they're more physical, they're more mature, they have a lot more at bats. And there's a stark difference between a junior in college transferring in and a freshman in college. Like, just the maturity level, their bodies, their how they approach the game, their process, everything it is that they do is different, because they've been able to hone that for pretty much every day of their life for the last 2 years. And there's something to be said about that if you're in the recruiting process and, maybe it's not working out for you for what you want, open your eyes to some JUCOs. It's not a bad place to go develop and play baseball. The other is it's going to be economically savvy, because it is a lot cheaper to go to a junior college than it is to go to a 4-year school. Even if it's say you end up at Division III, you're going to save a lot of money, because Division III schools by and large are pretty expensive. You can go to a junior college for cheap for 2 years and then go get your degree at a pretty good Division III school because you're able to develop, and you couldn't have gotten on the roster out of high school, but you can out of junior college. So I think it's something that's worth looking into if you are, stuck in the recruiting process. Like, do not just, foo-foo it and look down your nose at it. Like, there's good baseball being played there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other side of it too is, high schoolers have never been valued less than they are right now in the recruiting process. So if you go to a junior college, you're giving yourself an opportunity to create a little bit more leverage, in your process, right? So I don't want to take a whole podcast here, or, a whole hour and a half to tell everybody, hey, go JUCO. But it's one of the things that with our players, I had that conversation a lot, and people haven't really explored junior college as an option. But right now, I think it's a better time than ever to be, with a junior college program for all of the reasons we're talking about here. So definitely worth a look if you're in the middle of the process.
We're on the JUCO track. I think this is a good segue into kind of some of the timelines, because JUCO usually happens a lot later. And that's another thing that I think is important to understand about junior college, is that it doesn't need to be your North Star in this process. Like, if you're a 2026, you don't really need to be thinking about junior college baseball, because right now, if you're a 26, the only guys who are getting recruited are legitimate Division I players. The bulk of the 26 class is going to get recruited next summer, not even really this spring. It's more that mid-June to mid-September range is when most of those evaluations are going to happen. And that JUCO timeline is going to go into next fall. There's not a lot of guys who are committing to a junior college June 1st prior to the summer before their senior year. It's going to be a little bit later. But I think it's important for people to understand how this timeline works for guys, and where Division I, II, and III in junior college, like how it all plays out. So I don't know if you want to take a second and kind of talk through some of the different timing of it, so people have an understanding of kind of how this unfolds over the next year.
Yeah, sure. It's the timeline for recruiting has changed a lot over the last few years as everything's changed in recruiting and college baseball. And there's a lot of misinformation around it. So I'm glad we're touching on that. Juniors, man, like, just relax. You might see a couple guys post about, hey, they committed, and maybe you got a buddy that's committed, right? So for you 26s, there's going to be some guys that are off the board, but for the majority of players, I would say, when I say majority, I'd say like 90 to 95% of players that are going to be recruited to play college baseball, it is going to happen between, like, when I say happen, I mean where you're going to start getting some contact and like really start seeing the process unfold for you. Probably going to be between the middle of July and November 1st. That's the majority of guys are going to be in there. And then plenty of guys are going to be later than that. Very few high schoolers are going to be getting a whole lot other than just a little bit here and there, a text here and there, just a follow before that. And we're kind of in a unique situation where, again, one, these coaches are being a lot pickier because of the environment, and they should be, right? That's a good thing. With that being said, the high-end programs, so like the higher levels, Division I, mid-major Division I, Power Four, all that, they are going to go and try and get impact transfers in June. They're going to summer baseball games. They're going, they're watching. Obviously, you got Synergy and all that. They're watching games, but they're going to watch transfers. They want to see JUCO guys. They want to see 4-year transfers, and they're trying to get those guys to address holes in their roster immediately, because everybody wants to win now, of course. And the work that you do in the transfer portal between, really in June now is the window for it, right? So the work you do in June is going to really tee up your roster for the immediate year coming up. So they're going to address that first. We saw this past year a lot of mid-major Division I's. We're seeing 2025s for the first time in Georgia, WWBA and 17U national championships. These guys were an afterthought. Anytime we pick up the phone, is, hey, come watch this guy, see this guy. We got this guy going. All right, we're going to see him in Georgia. We'll see him, at the end of June. We'll see him in July. And so all of a sudden, the recruiting process was pushed back a little bit for these mid-major Division I guys that are like no doubters at that level. What was interesting is what happened at different levels now with Division II and really even Division III, especially high academic Division III, with a lot of higher end programs or higher level programs being occupied chasing down transfers in the early part of the summer. Nobody's talking to some really talented high schoolers, and they're getting a little nervous about it. So programs that wouldn't normally get a caliber of player that is available are shooting their shot, and they're trying to get guys that they wouldn't normally get. So they're going after the difference maker in high school that is largely unattainable in years past. But that's now where their focus is until everything kind of clears up with transfers after June. Then you'll see some trickle down a little bit. But there's players that can play at certain schools and certain levels that cannot get any attention from those schools early on in the summer because everybody is shooting above what they're really going to get. And sometimes they'll get it, dude. They'll get a difference maker. You see that a lot with the high academic programs too, and you guys work closely with that, where you can get a difference maker that's like a really high-end recruit, but just wants to get a really good degree, and there's nothing else available in June, and boom, they jump on an offer, right? So I just don't think that players and families understand that hey, there's nothing wrong with you. You're getting in front of coaches, you're getting seen, you're getting on their board, but they're not going to make a move on you until the dust settles in June with everything, at the top of college baseball and with transfers, right? So come July, come August, into September, October, you start seeing a lot of these roster spots kind of unlock, if you will, where they're starting to go after guys that are appropriate for the level that their team or their program is competed at, right? So case in point, I've talked with some Division twos where I'm selling a guy that I think is a no doubter for their program. He can play there and be an impact guy, but maybe just doesn't have the physicality that they're used to seeing with, maybe it's not a guy who's 6'4", right? But and what I'm getting back early in the summer is, hey, we're going to wait and see. We got some guys, we got some offers. We're going to wait and see how it plays out. And now talking to those same schools, here in November, there's still roster spots open. So they didn't get their guys early, but that's normal. Like that's how this all plays out. And if those guys aren't doing it that way, they're not doing their job. So it's not that they're getting it wrong or that they're doing anything incorrect. It's just kind of the way of the recruiting process as guys try and elevate the status of their program. So the big thing with that, understand if you're division, like a mid-major Division I guy, you're probably middle of the summer. That's probably where you are on into September. If you're a Division II guy, like a higher tier Division II, it's probably a similar timeline. Mid to lower tier Division II, that thing kind of spills into November, December. And then Division III, it's just a crapshoot. I wouldn't underestimate the level of program and the quality of recruiting that they're doing at that level. There are going to be Division IIIs that are done by August. There's going to be Division IIIs that are recruiting into next July. So the biggest thing is be patient. Don't expect a ton in the spring, but continue to do what you're doing as far as outreach. Don't just sit on your hands. Do everything you can do to give yourself an advantage, but know that the majority of the impact of the work that you've spent trying to get in touch with coaches and get on their board, that's going to bear fruit later in the summer and into the fall, almost at every level.
And a lot of these guys, I think sometimes to put the cart before the horse. If you're not getting recruited right now, which is to your point, the vast majority of high school kids right now, they haven't got phone calls. Coaches aren't responding to emails. They get a little bit of panic. Mm-hmm. You probably need to get better it's probably why you're not getting recruited, is that you haven't met the standard for that Division I school yet. So these next like 3 or 4 months are really, really important. But I find often that people are so focused on getting recruited that they forget they have a high school season that they need to play. You want to start turning some heads? Go have a really good high school season. Be able to email a coach and say, hey, I'm 3 starts into the year. I've been 84 to 87. Here's the video to prove it. I've thrown 18 innings. I've walked 2 guys and I've punched out 34. That's going to catch eyes because you did really well in high school. And we talk about this all the time. First step to getting recruited is you need to be a really good high school player. So these guys who are, to your point, there needs to be some patience in the recruiting process, but there needs to be some urgency on the level of commitment that you're making to get better, because everybody else is getting better too. So you got to have some urgency there. And Keith says it, I say it, you need to be recruitable before you can get recruited. And that's what these next 3 months are for. But to your point, panicking over it doesn't do you any good, because the vast majority of recruiting is going to happen July, August, September of next summer. So don't worry about it. Stay diligent. Reach out to coaches. But panic never does anybody any good. Just more stress.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've seen that a lot over the years, just where you get caught up in this mentality that's an older mentality of, oh, well, everybody's, if you're not committed by, summer going into your senior year, you're not a Division I guy or you're not a college guy. And it's just, unfortunately, people in our space will use that almost in a predatory way to try and leverage people into signing up for a service or, going to this event or doing that. And at the same time, you'll see college coaches will use that as leverage in their corner to try and get players to make commitments early. Sometimes the deals that maybe aren't right for them, So again, Andy, like you said, patience is just, it is a big thing. And, while you're being patient, just stay the course, get bigger, stronger, faster, and enjoy the process of going out and playing and trying to become a dude. If you do all that kind of stuff, you're going to be in good shape on the back end of this thing.
Yeah, we've watched a lot of guys who would be 26s go from nobody knows who they are this time of year. They go get after it in the weight room. They go get after it with their pitching coach or their hitting coach. They go and have a really good high school season. Summer ball comes around. They go and play well twice, and they've got 16 phone calls. That happens way more than people want to talk about. It usually is really slow, and then it's fast. And then it's like, oh, wow, I got 4 phone calls today because I went 3 for 4 and I played really hard and we were facing a good arm and, I ran the bases well. And you do that kind of stuff, but you have to play well. Which leads me to my next question, because I think this showcase versus the gameplay stuff is, we love metrics, the exit velos in the 60s and the velocities in the bullpen and all that kind of stuff. I'm guessing you're going to have the same answer that we do, but where do you think coaches lean when it comes to the evaluation stuff in terms of showcases versus the in-game actual play?
I think, I think you need a combination of both. I think you do, because the metrics are the door opener. Like the physicality is the door opener right now. It doesn't get you recruited. It doesn't get you a deal. It doesn't get you signed necessarily, but it gets you on the board and it gets you on their list to come watch you. With everybody being a little bit more picky with what they're bringing in, a lot of coaches and a lot of programs are starting by identifying players that look like what they've seen work at their level, that look like the type of player that they want in their offense or in their bullpen, right? So the showcases that's what they are. I mean, you get to go there and you get to show off your physicality. You go to a showcase and you're a guy that hits four balls out in BP and you run a 6.6 560 and you throw 87 from the outfield. People are going to be intrigued. Now, you might not be a good baseball player, and what they're going to do is they're going to go and watch you play games because they liked you at that showcase. So you really need to do both. You need to still be a good player. The physicality, the showcasing will get you on the radar, but being a good ball player and doing well in gameplay is what's going to seal the deal for you. So that's usually what you see. Now, of course, some coaches do it differently. Some guys may hate showcase. They may not want to go to a workout and watch a guy. They may only want to watch gameplay. And some coaches might be wowed with a player and their physical ability to the extent that they'll just fire off offers when they see him the first time at a showcase. But the majority of guys are going to do it the way I just told you.
I think the other thing too, and it's not to say you have to do it, but I do think there is a tad bit of value in having a third-party verification for some of your metrics as well, especially if you're an arm. I think sometimes we can get lost in the metrics of the hitters. Your exit velo off a tee. Like I don't necessarily know what that means, but if you're on Rapsodo or TrackMan and stuff at some of these events, and it's posted to your profile or whatever. Like I know I still do it. I know a lot of coaches do. You get an email from a kid that you don't necessarily know, or he says that he's 83 to 85, and you Google him and like, oh wow, damn sure is 83, 85, like verified by PBR or Perfect Game or Best in the U.S., whatever it might be. Like he is. So like that's true. So I think sometimes like not only from the exposure standpoint and being able to be seen by, as like an intro, more or less is kind of what you're saying. And I agree. Like it's a little bit more of an introduction of yourself and your skill set, because it's a controlled setting and it's a little bit more skill oriented than it is maybe gameplay wise. But you can still kind of parse some of that stuff out. You're still going to show up and watch the kid play. But, if you do have those kind of third-party verification metrics there, like that can go a long way for you in the process too, especially if it's, like I say it, coaching at RPI, if you're from Washington, the state of Washington, and you email me, like the chances of me actually getting out there and seeing you multiple times are slim. But, I pull up, the Pacific Northwest stuff and I see that, yeah, you're 84, 86, like, okay, like, he sure is, and it's verified by people who, use legit stuff. All right, there's something there. I'm going to go down this rabbit hole and see if, like, maybe I can see you play at some point in time, or maybe I know a bunch of people who have seen you play that I could get a fair assessment on, to go from there to back the video and everything else I'm seeing too. So just something, food for thought. I'm not saying you have to go to every single showcase under the sun, but it's not a bad idea sometimes to kind of, sign up for one or two and kind of get that stuff. So you have that as part of your recruiting process as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just to kind of tag on behind that, I'd say before you go and sign up for one of these scout days where your metrics are going to be posted publicly on a profile like a PBR, PG, anything like that, test your metrics yourself. I mean, run a 60 on a watch, see if you can borrow a buddy's pocket radar and get an exit velo off a front toss or off of somebody throwing BP to you. Do that stuff to see if you're in the area of where you think you need to be to get recruited. If you're going to go and say, hey, look, I'm an arm and I know that I need to be 80, 84 to get into a category of program or school that I'm interested in, but you're sitting at 73, maybe you're in between, throwing programs, whatever it may be, make sure that you go in prepared, having an idea of what you're going to be, because while it's great that, hey, you've got metrics that are verified and all that is out there, that's going to help you in the process. It also can hurt you because it becomes your billboard. Whenever I go and recruit a player, hey, I hear about a guy, type in his name, followed by baseball and his grad year, and then the first things I see are PBR, Perfect Game, NCSA, where they're just filling in stuff themselves. But, you see all the recruiting profiles, and that becomes your introductory piece. So it is super important, Keith. I think you're absolutely right. that you should do some of that and you should mix it in with part of your process, but make sure that you're intentional about how and when you're doing it because it can definitely move the ball forward, but it can also be a roadblock for you. And it's
Yeah,
expensive, obviously. You don't want to do it like 20 times until you get it right. So
it is. And I think
some
Andy and I
people do
talk
it.
about this too. And like we get this question quite a bit, especially right now with arms of like, should I go to these camps and showcases in January or February? And I am a hardline no, especially if you're, say it this way. Like if you're a New York kid or a PA kid or a Jersey kid or a New England kid and you're not playing high school baseball until April, like the chances of you being in a really good spot to be able to throw in January are pretty slim. And that's a super long time frame to be up. You know, so like you're talking January through October, that's 10 straight months of throwing. And, you know, now if you're a Southeast kid and you're starting baseball in February and you're ready to go, like, yeah, man, have at it. Like, go blow it out and see what's up because it's a different, you're playing in a different time frame than other parts of the country. And I just think sometimes like people feel the pressure to do it. And, you know, I lived it, I recruited it. Like, you can do yourself more harm than good, not only from an injury standpoint, but also you go down and you're not ready to throw and you're 74 to 76. There's going to be a lot of dudes who just put an X right through your name and move on with their lives. And if you go down and you're 83 to 85, they're going to circle you and be like, I need to see him in the summer. So there's
Right.
no
They're
real,
still coming to watch you. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
They're still coming to watch you play. So like you just spent $350 to essentially get told, I got to come see you throw again in the high school season and in the summer before I can even remotely come close to making a decision. So instead, build up safely and use November, December, January, February, those 4 months to get better and stronger and bigger and faster so that when you do give an account of yourself in the high school season, then in the summer, you're further along than you should and you built up in a far more safe manner that way. Now, the caveat to that, if you're a position guy and you want to go take BP and let it rip, like, yeah, go ahead. You know, make sure you've gotten in the cage and you've hit and you've done some things so that, you know, you're not super rusty. But hey, man, if you want to go let it rip and take some BP in a showcase setting and do it that way and run the 60, yeah, no problem with it. Mine is more on the side of the pitchers where it's like if you haven't thrown a ball, if you shut down and you just started throwing and you're 2 weeks into throwing, like you shouldn't be going to a showcase and trying to blow it out because there's only bad things can come of that. Like there's not a whole hell of a lot of good that can come out of that scenario. Again, position guys, hey man, let it rip. You're going to go throw 6 balls across the diamond and take a bunch of BP and some live at bats in a cage. Like have at it. Go do it. It's fine. But from a pitching standpoint, I don't love it because of that aspect of things.
Yeah, I think you're right about a lot of that stuff for arms. And, you know, it comes down to just having a plan on how you want to navigate the offseason and the recruiting process to where if you are a high-end arm that's just been under the radar, maybe you made a late jump, maybe you made your jump in August or September and you feel like you didn't get in front of the guys you need to get in front of. I always tell guys, hey, look at that MLK weekend, that mid to late January slot where there's a ton of camps where schools are trying to just see guys before the spring and have some guys on their list to follow up with, you know, in late June. So if you are a guy that feels like you need to throw in front of college coaches, that's the time to do it in the off season, right? If you're going to do a camp, you do it then, and you make sure that you tailor your off season arm care to that date, and you work backwards off of it, right? You know, I mean, if that means you shut down a little bit earlier in the fall, you shut down a little earlier in the fall. Like, do you need to throw on, you know, November 18th? I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to do and who you're trying to get in front of. But you know, if you have an idea that hey, you want to try and hit some camps, you want to do it before the spring, that's usually the weekend, that weekend, and the weekend after, the ones that make sense. And make sure that you take care of your arm starting really, you know, if you have to shut down November and then start doing some, you know, maybe some kind of arm program or something through December to ramp up for that weekend. That's probably the only way to do it safely if you're a pitcher. Position guys, get out there, play baseball, get feedback, learn, work with the coaches. The winter camps are sometimes the best ones to do if you're a position guy because they tend to be a little smaller. Sometimes they're indoors and they're really hands-on and more development geared than they are showcase geared. You're working in the cage with the hitting coach. He's giving you pointers, that kind of stuff. But I think you've got some great points there about making sure that you do it right, protect yourself as an arm.
I have nothing to add to either of that. Both of your points, Keith. We're very much in line with our thoughts on the arms. Final question we ask everybody. It'll be interesting. It'd be good for you to give this kind of feedback because you're doing it. Like you're helping people do this. What are a couple key pieces of advice you would throw out there to families and players that are going through the process right now?
It would be to get as much good information as you can get and have a plan. And, when you're talking about having a plan, set some end goals. Talk about where you think you want to end up, get feedback from the people you're working with about where they think you can end up, what you need to do to get there. And then that's going to start putting, really just kind of laying out a roadmap of how you need to spend your time and what you need to be doing. Right. So a lot of people approach the recruiting process as a fire from the hip and fire as much as you can approach, right? So it's not very targeted. There's really no rhyme or reason as to why they're doing the things they're doing, other than that maybe they saw them work for someone else or they feel like it's going to move them in the right direction. But if you start with an end goal and kind of build backwards with a plan with the people you're working with, and hopefully you're working with good people, that's the easiest way to not lose track of this thing because it's really, really, really overwhelming. It is very difficult emotionally on players and families because it's really just a period of rejection. You're going to be ignored. You're going to be told no. I mean, it is, there's a lot of looking in the mirror, and it can be tough on guys. So it's easy to kind of stray off course if you set a good foundation on what you're trying to do and you kind of just roadmap the whole thing, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and things to focus on with it, you generally can stay the course, and then you can be a little bit more targeted. You're going to have better results earlier by doing that. This is the one thing in that regard that I don't think people ever talk about, and if they do, they're definitely not talking about it enough. At the beginning of the recruiting process, I think it's important as a family, and I'm not saying that parents, you need to tell your kid how much money you're making or what they can and can't afford necessarily for college, but you need as a family to look at what your price range out of pocket is for college, not for college baseball, for college. If you can only afford, and I'm going to get really long-winded on this, but it is a sticking point on this, all right, in the recruiting process. That if you can afford $10,000 a year out of pocket, and you think that you're going to maybe get a little bit of Pell Grant, or at the very least some government loans, right? Then great. Like, have an idea that that's your number, right? If you're not willing to do loans and it's just you're like, hey, we're going to pay cash, or that's how we're doing this, and maybe you got 35,000 a year in the budget as a family, then know that that's what your number is. Because what ends up happening is so many players and families will chase down opportunities saying like, hey, I want to go to this school, or I'll go anywhere. And then a school's interested and you're like, well, wait, but I need you to give me $70,000 in order to afford going there. It's not a fit. It was never a fit. It never was going to be. So if you spent $175 to go to their prospect camp, stayed in a hotel, ate out, you wasted all that time and money. And we want to avoid that when we're trying to get results in the recruiting process, right? There's more to talk about, but on the other side of that, understanding what your range of affordability is going to make you a more recruitable player for the majority of programs out there. It's not about necessarily when guys are recruiting, it's, I hear this all the time, like, yo, I could play there, like so and so's going there and I'm better than him, or I've seen them play, I'm a better player than guys on their roster. That there may be truth to that in some spots, but it's not about, each roster is not about having the best players on the roster. It's about having the players that fit the puzzle to build the roster. There's not a lot of, you don't have unlimited budgets. You only have so much scholarship money. Most programs have no NIL money, so there's very rarely going to have anybody that's on a spending spree. So financially, you need to fit their puzzle. As a recruiting coordinator, as I got older into it, and I was really looking for good value in players, I wanted to try and recruit good players that we could afford, or that could afford us. And I didn't want to go down the recruiting process or go down that path without having that understanding on the front end. So I think that's a great place to start. You also want to talk about what kind of education you're looking for, what region of the country you want to be in. Like, I don't think that I was a guy that wanted to go to school in the Southwest. Like, I was from New Jersey. I wanted to be within a few hours of home. So I knew that my region was going to be in this bubble of 2 to 3 hours away from Trenton, New Jersey, right? Um, so you can start putting together a list of schools that fall in line with that and with your interest there, with your interest academically, and then of course with what you have available to work with cost wise. I think those are three really good things to start with when you're trying to put together a plan. And again, you can build backwards off of an end goal of, hey, I want to be a Division I college baseball player. Hey, I want to be a guy that plays at a high academic program. So, I'm looking at this conference, this conference, this conference, and you kind of just build back from there. And once you do that, you've got a plan, you've got a list of schools to attack, and you can start working down that road and make adjustments as needed off of that. But that is my biggest piece of advice, is to be prepared with a plan and then try and stick to it as best you can. Deviate from it as needed, but don't go into this thing clueless. And understand that nobody is ever prepared for the college recruiting process, especially in baseball. It's one of the more absurd things that you're going to go through and experience as a player and as a parent. And there's nothing that's going to prepare you for it until you've been into it, right? You really, there's no relevant information in this space that pertains to anything else in your life, right? And then there are a lot of people that are going to feed misinformation to take advantage of you. So, you need to be wary about who you put in your corner.
Yeah, I mean, so many good points there. I'm not even gonna rehash them all. Feel free to hit the rewind button and listen to that again. But I mean, you hit on a lot of the things that we preach to the players and the families that we work with, which is, you got to have a plan. You got to have some sort of an end goal. You need to get feedback so you can develop. You need that feedback to steer the ship. And then you got to be flexible. You got to be willing to adjust course, because you watch guys make big jumps, and all of a sudden the whole recruiting process changes. And so you see the other thing happen where you're on track to maybe be a Division I scholarship guy, and then you don't make that jump. Well, now we need to reassess. So that constant reassessment. But my big takeaway from what you mentioned there, and I think this is really, really important, and it's why we have you on, it's why we had Jonathan on so much, is you got to surround yourself with some good people who aren't going to blow smoke up your ass just because it's the way that they're going to get you to like them. There's no time for fluff in this process. And it doesn't mean that you need to be mean about it. That's not how you go about it. But you have to have honest feedback. You have to have people in your corner who have been through this in some way, shape, or form, that can make that phone call to a coach to get the feedback from a coach. Because even if it's feedback that you don't like, that's the feedback that steers the process. So having the right people in your corner is paramount. And for people out there listening to this, make sure you're leaning on some people that have an idea of what they're doing, and they're not there just to make you feel good about yourself. You need some people who are going to be able to speak with you honestly and from a place of experience. Well, thank you, Geoff. Greatly
Yeah.
appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, awesome being on. Really enjoyed talking, recruiting and baseball with you. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely, man. I'm sure we'll do it again. Maybe we'll get you and Jonathan on at the same time one of these days coming up.
That's this podcast would never end if you get the two of us on here. Got a guy from Long Island, a guy from New Jersey. There's too much talking right there.
we'll sprinkle in some Jets talk, some
Yeah.
Eagles talk, Giants talk,
Oh,
Niners talk. I mean, there's plenty of topics to go around. But no, man, really appreciate it, and obviously we'll be in touch, and we'll keep pushing the Elite National. We know you guys do a really good job there, and just really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, and look at players, parents, anybody out there, if you're looking for a travel and showcase baseball option for the 2025 season, we're actively recruiting players right now. So, teams at elitebaseball.co. Shoot us an email if you're interested in hearing what we're about.
Hit up Geoff. Hit up Jonathan. Thank you for listening, everybody. We will talk to you next week. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.